Welcome to the Ghastly Guide YouTube channel. You think you know what lurks in the darkest corners of the internet. You think you've seen it all. The marketplaces, the forums, the twisted communities that exist beyond the reach of search engines and conventional browsing. But I'm here to tell you that you haven't seen anything. Not even close. My name is David, and 3 months ago, I thought I was just another cybersecurity researcher doing my job. I spent my days diving into the digital underground, mapping networks, tracking malware, documenting the ever-evolving landscape of online crime. It was dangerous work, sure, but it was controlled danger, clinical, professional. That all changed on a Tuesday night in October. I was deep in a tour session, following a lead on a new ransomware group, when I stumbled across something that shouldn't have existed. A hidden service with a URL so complex, so deeply buried, that finally felt like discovering a secret room behind a wall that shouldn't have had space for one. The site was called the Observatory. The interface was stark. Black background, green text, like something from the early days of computing. No graphics, no fancy design, just a simple message that made my blood run cold. "We've been watching you, David." Click to continue. My real name, right there on the screen. I should have closed the browser immediately. Should have run a full system scan, check for breaches, maybe even wipe my drives clean. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when you made a career out of diving headfirst into digital rabbit holes. I clicked, the screen flickered, and suddenly I was looking at what appeared to be a live video feed. The image was grainy, shot through what looked like night vision, but clear enough to make out details. It showed a street, my street. The view was from across the road, focused on a window on the second floor of a modest 2-story house. My window, my bedroom window. I spun around, heart hammering, and peered through the blinds. The street was empty, bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. No cars, no people, nothing that could explain the feed I was seeing on my screen. When I turned back to the monitor, the image had changed. Now it showed the interior of a room I didn't recognize. Some kind of basement or underground chamber with concrete walls stained dark with moisture. In the center sat a single chair, and beside it, a table covered in instruments I didn't want to identify. But it was the walls that truly horrified me. They were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, arranged in neat rows like a twisted gallery. Even from the low resolution of the video feed, I could make out enough detail to see that they were all surveillance photos. People going about their daily lives, unaware they were being watched. People at work, at home, with their families. And there, in the center of the wall, blown up larger than the rest, was a photo of me sitting at this very desk. Text appeared at the bottom of the screen. "Welcome to the Observatory, David. Population, 247. You are subject 248. The number seemed to pulse on the screen, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air seeping through my window. 247. 247 what? People they were watching? People they had collected? I tried to navigate away from the site, but the browser wouldn't respond. The back button was grayed out, the address bar locked. It was as if the site had taken control of my entire system. When I attempted to open a new tab, it immediately redirected to the Observatory. The video feed changed again, this time showing what looked like a control room filled with banks of monitors. Each screen displayed a different feed: bedrooms, living rooms, offices, bathrooms. Dozens of people, all unaware they were being observed, going about their private moments with no idea that someone, somewhere, was cataloging their every move. A chat window opened in the corner of my screen, and words began appearing in that same sickly green text. "You found us, David. But more importantly, we've found you. We've been watching for quite some time now. Your work has been impressive. Your dedication to uncovering secrets. Your willingness to venture where others fear to tread. These qualities make you an ideal candidate." My hands were shaking now as I typed back. Candidate for what? For observation, for study, for inclusion in our great work. What great work? The documentation of human behavior in its purest form. When people believe they are truly alone, truly unobserved, what do they become? How do they act? What secrets do they harbor? We have been collecting data for 15 years now. David, building the most comprehensive database of human nature ever assembled. I felt sick. This wasn't just voyeurism or blackmail. This was something far more systematic, far more sinister. They were treating people like lab rats, studying them from the shadows, reducing human lives to data points in some twisted experiment. The best part, the text continued, is that our subjects never know. They go about their lives, thinking they have privacy, thinking they control, but we see everything. We record everything. We learn from everything. And now you get to be part of it. I yanked the power cord from my computer, plunging the room into darkness. But as I sat there in the black silence, I realized that shutting down my computer wouldn't make this go away. If they had been watching me, if they had infiltrated my system, then they knew everything. Where I lived, where I worked, my routines, my habits. They knew me better than I knew myself. And I was about to discover just how deep their surveillance went. 3 days passed before I could bring myself to turn my computer back on. 3 days of paranoia, of checking and rechecking my locks, of jumping at every sound. I called in sick to work, telling my supervisor I had food poisoning. It wasn't entirely a lie. The thought of what I discovered made me physically ill. When I finally booted up my system, I half expected to find it wiped clean or completely compromised. Instead, everything appeared normal. My files were intact. My security software showed no intrusions, and my browser history showed no trace of the observatory. It was as if none of it had happened. But I knew better. The memory of that green text, those surveillance photos, that basement chamber, it was all burned into my mind with crystal clarity. I began obsessively checking my network traffic, running deep scans, examining every process and service running on my machine. That's when I found it. Hidden deep in my system files was a program I didn't recognize, a small executable file with a timestamp matching the night I discovered the observatory. It was designed to look like a legitimate system process, but when I analyzed its code, I realized what was a keylogger, a surveillance program that had been recording everything I typed, every website I visited, every file I accessed. But it wasn't just logging my activity. It was transmitting it somewhere. The destination IP address led to a server farm in Eastern Europe, but when I tried to trace it further, I hit walls. Layers upon layers of proxies and routing protocols that would have taken months to unravel. They weren't just watching me through my webcam. They had complete access to my digital life. I spent the next week in a state of controlled panic, systematically rebuilding my computer from scratch, installing new security measures, changing every password I'd ever used. I even went so far as to buy a new laptop with cache, setting it up on a completely different internet connection. But the paranoia followed me everywhere. I started noticing things, little things that might have been coincidences, but felt like something more. The same car parked on my street 3 days in a row. A utility worker who seemed to be spending an awful lot of time examining the telephone pole outside my house. Neighbors I'd never seen before suddenly taking evening walks past my property. Was I being paranoid, or were they really watching me in the physical world now too? The answer came on a Friday night, 2 weeks after my initial discovery. I was working late on my new laptop, researching the observatory through every avenue I could think of when my doorbell rang. It was past midnight. Nobody visits at midnight unless it's an emergency. I crept a window and peered through the blinds. A woman stood on my doorstep, middle-aged, professionally dressed, holding what looked like a tablet computer. She didn't look threatening, but something about her presence at this hour sent alarm bells ringing in my head. The doorbell rang again, followed by a polite knock. "David." Her voice was calm, pleasant. "I know you're home. We need to talk." I didn't respond, hoping she would give up and leave. Instead, she held up her tablet and pressed something on the screen. Immediately, my phone buzzed with a notification. She had sent me a message. Somehow, this stranger had my personal phone number and was texting me from my doorstep. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." The message read, "But we're going to have a conversation tonight." I looked at my phone, then back at the woman through the blinds. She was staring directly at the window I was peering through, as if she could see me perfectly despite the darkness and the closed blinds. She smiled and waved. My blood turned to ice. There was no way she should have been able to see me, not from that angle, not in this lighting, unless I looked around my living room with new eyes. The smart TV I'd bought last year, the voice-activated speaker on my kitchen counter, the security camera I'd installed outside my front door, all of them internet connected, all of them potentially compromised. They weren't just watching me through my computer. They had turned my entire house into a surveillance network. Another text arrived. The longer you make me wait out here, the more unpleasant this conversation is going to become. I have information about the observatory that you need to hear. Information that could save your life. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay inside, to call the police, to barricade myself in my bedroom and wait for dawn, I found myself walking to the front door. My hand hovered over the deadbolt for a long moment before I finally, reluctantly, unlocked it. The woman smiled as the door opened. Up close, I could see she was older than I'd initially thought, maybe in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked like someone's mother, like a librarian or a college professor. She looked harmless. That should have been my first warning. Hello, David. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I'm a researcher like you. May I come in? I'd rather you didn't. I understand your caution, but what I have to tell you can't be discussed out here. Too many ears, too many eyes. She gestured vaguely at the street around us. They're always listening, David, always watching. Even now. Something in her tone made me step aside. She walked into my living room like she owned the place, glancing around with the appraising eye of someone cataloging details. Nice setup, she said, noting my computers, my networking equipment, the books on cybersecurity that line my shelves. Very thorough, very professional. They chose well. Chose me for what? She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been sympathy in her eyes. David, what do you know about missing person statistics in this country? The question caught me off guard. What does that have to do with anything? Over 600,000 people are reported missing in the United States every year. Most of them turn up eventually. Runaways who come home, adults who had personal crises and needed to disappear for a while. But about 4,400 remain missing permanently, vanish without a trace. She paused, letting that number sink in. The FBI attributes most of these to foul play, but they can never find the bodies, never identify the perpetrators. Do you know why? I shook my head, though I was beginning to suspect I did want to hear the answer. Because those people weren't murdered, David. They were recruited. They found something they shouldn't have found, or they knew something they shouldn't have known, and the observatory decided they would be more valuable as participants than as problems. The room felt like it was spinning. You're saying they kidnap people? I'm saying they collect people. There's a difference. When you're kidnapped, people look for you. When you're collected, you simply transition. Your old life ends and your new life begins. She walked over to my window and peered through the blinds, just as I had done earlier. They've been operating for almost 20 years now, David. Started as a legitimate behavioral research project funded by a consortium of tech companies. The goal was to understand human behavior patterns for marketing purposes. Figuring out what makes people click on ads, what influences purchasing decisions. But it evolved. It evolved, she confirmed. The researchers realized they were sitting on something much more valuable than marketing data. They had found a way to observe human behavior in completely natural settings, without the artificial constraints of laboratory conditions. They could study people's real personalities, their true desires, their hidden motivations. I felt sick again. And the missing people? The ones who show the most interesting behavioral patterns get invited to participate in deeper studies, long-term observation in controlled environments. She turned back to me, and I could see my own horror reflected in her expression. They call it residential research. You mean they're imprisoned? I mean they're subjects, fed, housed, cared for medically, but never allowed to leave, never allowed to contact the outside world. Their families are told they moved away, started new lives, wanted to be left alone. Sometimes they're forged emails or letters supporting this story. Sometimes there are even staged phone calls from voice actors. The woman in front of me suddenly seemed much more dangerous than she had a few minutes ago. "How do you know all this?" I asked. She smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Because, David, I used to work for them." Dr. Sarachin settled into my couch like she had been invited for tea instead of delivering the most terrifying news I'd ever heard. She placed her tablet on the coffee table, and I could see it was displaying what looked like personnel files. Photographs of people alongside detailed psychological profiles. "I worked for the observatory for 7 years," she began, her voice taking on a detached tone of someone recounting clinical data. "I was brought in as a behavioral psychologist when they decided to expand beyond simple surveillance. My job was to analyze the subjects, identify patterns, determine who will be most valuable for the next phase of research, the residential program. Among other things." She swiped across her tablet screen, showing me file after file. Each one contained a photo, personal details, behavioral assessments, and a status indicator. Most showed green text reading active surveillance. A disturbing number showed red text reading collected. You have to understand, David, when I started working for them, I thought I was participating in legitimate research. The ethics documentation was impeccable. The funding sources appeared legitimate, and the stated goals seemed noble enough. Understanding human behavior to improve society, reduce crime, identify mental health issues before they became dangerous. She paused on a file showing a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and a bright smile. The photo looked like it had been taken from a social media profile. "This is Rebecca Martinez. She was a graphic designer from Portland. Never married, lived alone, had a very predictable routine. She became one of our subjects 3 years ago when our algorithms identified her as having what we termed optimal baseline characteristics for long-term study." What does that mean? It means she was lonely, isolated, and unlikely to be missed immediately if she disappeared. Her behavioral patterns suggested she was struggling with depression and social anxiety, which made her psychologically interesting to our researchers. I stared at the photo. Rebecca Martinez looked so normal, so alive. The idea that someone had been watching her, studying her, planning to collect her made my stomach churn. What happened to her? Dr. Chin swiped to the next screen, which showed a series of surveillance photos documenting what looked like Rebecca's daily routine: leaving her apartment, getting coffee, working at her computer, sleeping in her bed. The final photo showed her walking into what looked like an office building. She received a job offer. A very attractive job offer from a company that claimed to value her design skills and wanted to relocate her to their headquarters for a long-term project. The salary was triple what she was making. The benefits were incredible, and they even offered to handle all the logistics of her move. It was fake. The company was real enough. Shell Corporation with a legitimate business address, professional website, verifiable references. But the job was a fiction. Rebecca Martinez walked into that building for what she thought was her first day of work, and she never walked out. The casual way Dr. Chin described as horror was almost as disturbing as the content itself. She talked about Rebecca like she was discussing a lab rat, a data point, not a human being whose life had been stolen. Where is she now? Facility 7 in rural Montana, former military installation that the observatory purchased through another shell company. She lives in what amounts to a very comfortable prison cell, under constant observation, participating in behavioral studies 8 to 10 hours per day. Dr. Chin showed me another series of photos, these ones from inside some kind of institutional setting. Clean, modern, but undeniably claustrophobic. I could see cameras mounted in every corner, and the windows were clearly reinforced with security glass. They tell the subjects that they're participating in a revolutionary study that will benefit humanity. They're given comfortable accommodations, good food, medical care, even entertainment and educational opportunities. But they're never told how long the study will last, and they're never given the option to leave. That's kidnapping. That's imprisonment. That's research, according to the observatory's legal team. The subjects all signed comprehensive consent forms when they were hired. Forms that included clauses about participating in workplace behavioral studies and agreeing to relocation for extended periods. Buried in pages of dense legal language were provisions that essentially sign away their freedom. I thought about all the terms of service agreements I'd clicked through without reading, all the privacy policies I'd agreed to without a second thought. How easy would it be to hide something sinister in that mountain of legal text? "But you got out," I said. "You're here," warning me. Something changed. For the first time since she'd arrived, Dr. Chen's professional demeanor cracked slightly. I saw fear flicker across her face, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. Something changed 3 months ago. The observatory's research focus shifted from behavioral observation to something much darker. She navigated to a new section of her tablet, and what I saw there made my blood freeze. The files were labeled Project Mirror, and they contained detailed psychological profiles unlike anything I'd seen before. These weren't simple behavioral assessments. They were complete personality maps, documenting everything from childhood traumas to deepest fears to sexual fantasies. They started using surveillance data to create perfect psychological profiles of their subjects. Not just what people do, but why they do it, what motivates them, what terrifies them, what they would do in extreme situations. Jesus, what for? Control. Perfect, absolute control. Once you understand someone completely, their fears, their desires, their weaknesses, you can manipulate them into doing anything. The observatory realized they had stumbled onto something much more valuable than academic research data. She showed me a video file, surveillance footage of what looked like an ordinary office building. But the people inside weren't behaving normally. They moved with a strange uniformity, performing their tasks with mechanical precision. These are former subjects who have been graduated from residential research. The observatory has learned how to break people down psychologically and rebuild them as perfect, obedient workers. They've created a private army of individuals who will follow any order without question. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They're creating slaves. They're creating tools. Human tools that can be deployed for any purpose. Corporate espionage, political manipulation, even assassination. All of it completely untraceable because the operatives appear to be ordinary citizens going about their normal lives. I started pacing around my living room, my mind racing. And they want to recruit me for this? You found them, David. In 20 years of operation, fewer than a dozen people have discovered the observatory independently. Most of them are now residents of Facility 7. But you're different. Different how? Your skills, your knowledge, your professional background. They don't just want to study you. They want to recruit you. They want you to join their research team, help them expand their operations, develop new surveillance technologies. She stood up, gathering her tablet. That's why I'm here, to make you an offer. The change in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. The sympathetic researcher was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculating. What kind of offer? Join us willingly, and you'll be treated as a colleague instead of a subject. Help us improve our systems, and you'll be compensated generously while participating in the most advanced behavioral research project in human history. I backed away from her, suddenly understanding the true purpose of her visit. And if I refuse? She smiled. And for the first time, I saw the predator lurking behind her professional mask. Then you become subject 248, David. And trust me, it's much more pleasant when you cooperate from the beginning. I ran for the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find from the wooden block on my counter. When I turned back around, Dr. Chung was standing right behind me. She was no longer alone. 2 men in dark clothing stood in my living room, having entered through what I now realized was my unlocked front door. They were large, professional, and utterly silent. "I'm sorry it has to be this way," Dr. Chen said, pulling a small device from her jacket pocket. "But you've seen too much to be allowed to walk away." The device in her hand looked like a small remote control, but when she pressed a button, I felt a sharp pain in my neck. I looked down to see a small dart protruding from my throat. The room began to spin, and I felt my legs giving out beneath me. "Don't worry." Dr. Chen's voice seemed to be coming from very far away. "You're going to love your new home." As consciousness faded, I realized that I had been wrong about everything. This wasn't a rescue attempt or a warning. It was a collection. I woke up in a room that was simultaneously familiar and alien. Clean white walls, a comfortable bed, a desk with a computer, and a bookshelf filled with technical manuals and cybersecurity textbooks, many of which were my own. It looked almost exactly like my home office, but everything felt wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the lighting was too uniform, and there were no windows. I sat up slowly, my head still foggy from whatever they had drugged me with, and tried to make sense of my surroundings. That's when I noticed the cameras, small, nearly invisible lenses, mounted in each corner of the ceiling. They tracked my movement as I stood, mechanical eyes cataloging my every gesture. A speaker crackled to life somewhere in the walls. "Good morning, David. I hope you slept well." The voice was familiar, Dr. Chun, speaking with that same pleasant professional tone she had used in my living room. "Welcome to the observatory. You are now resident researcher 248, and I'm pleased to inform you that your integration process will begin immediately." I walked to what I assumed was the door, but there was no handle, no lock, no visible way to open it. The surface was smooth and seamless, like it had been carved from a single piece of metal. "Let me out," I called to the cameras. "This is illegal. People will be looking for me." Actually, David, that's not entirely accurate. As of yesterday morning, you submitted your resignation to your employer via email, citing personal burnout and a desire to relocate for a fresh start. Your landlord received similar notice about terminating your lease. Your few remaining social contacts received messages explaining that you were taking time to work on yourself and would be out of touch for an indefinite period. The casual efficiency of it was terrifying. They had erased my existence from the outside world in less than 24 hours. Your personal belongings have been donated to charity, your bank accounts have been closed, and your digital footprints have been systematically eliminated. To everyone who ever knew you, David Martinez simply decided to disappear and start over somewhere else. A section of the wall slid open, revealing Dr. Chin standing in a pristine white corridor. She was no longer dressed in professional attire I remembered, but wore what looked like a lab coat over casual clothing. "Shall we begin the tour?" I had no choice but to follow her. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with identical doors that I assumed led to other residential units. Everything was spotlessly clean and uniformly lit by hidden sources that created no shadows anywhere. The observatory is home to 247 other residents, Dr. Chen explained as we walked, each one carefully selected for their unique skills and psychological profiles. You'll find that your neighbors are some of the most interesting people you've ever met. Artists, scientists, engineers, researchers, even a few former law enforcement officers who got too close to our operations. We passed what looked like a common area where a dozen people sat reading, playing chess, or staring blankly at television screens. They all looked healthy and well cared for, but there was something fundamentally wrong with their expressions. They moved and interacted with each other like actors performing roles they didn't quite understand. The integration process typically takes 6 to 8 months, Dr. Chin continued. During that time, you will participate in various behavioral studies while we calibrate your psychological profile and determine your optimal assignment within our research structure. What if I refuse to cooperate? She stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression showing what might have been genuine sadness. "David, I need you to understand something. The observatory isn't just a research facility. It's an ecosystem. Everyone here has a role to play, a function to serve. Those who embrace their purpose find the experience quite fulfilling. Those who resist..." She gestured to a security camera mounted above us. "Let me show you something." She led me to an observation window overlooking what appeared to be a medical facility. Inside, I could see a man strapped to a table while technicians attached electrodes to his head. His eyes were open, but they held no recognition, no awareness. Subject 891 was an investigative journalist who discovered our operations 2 years ago. He was remarkably resistant to our standard integration protocols, so we had to employ more direct methods of attitude adjustment. The man on the table was clearly alive but showed no signs of consciousness or personality. He was a human shell, breathing and functioning, but containing nothing that could be called a person. We call it deep integration Dr. Chen explained. Complete personality restructuring through targeted neurological intervention. It's not our preferred method. We lose so much valuable data when we have to resort to this level of modification, but it's necessary in certain cases. The threat was unmistakable. Cooperate, or be reduced to a mindless automaton. What do you want from me? Your expertise, David. Your knowledge of cybersecurity systems. Your understanding of digital surveillance. Your creative problem-solving abilities. We're expanding our operations globally, and we need talented individuals to help us develop new methods of observation and data collection. She led me to what looked like a high-tech command center filled with monitors displaying surveillance feeds from around the world. Technicians sat at workstations, managing what appeared to be a massive network of cameras, microphones, and data-gathering systems. This is where you'll be working once your integration is complete. We're currently monitoring over 50,000 individuals across 17 countries, with plans to expand to 200,000 within the next 5 years. The scope of it was breathtaking and horrifying. 50,000 people living their lives under constant surveillance, unaware that their most private moments were being recorded and analyzed. The beauty of modern technology, Dr. Chen continued, is that people willingly invite surveillance into their homes. Smartphones, smart TVs, voice assistants, security cameras, fitness trackers. Every device is a potential observation point. Your job will be to help us develop new ways to access and exploit these systems. I stare at the monitors showing countless private moments. People sleeping, eating, working, making love, crying alone in their bedrooms. Each screen represented a life being violated, a person whose privacy and autonomy had been stolen without their knowledge or consent. This is insane. You're destroying people's lives. We're studying people's lives. There's a difference. The subjects outside these walls go about their daily routines exactly as they always have. They're happy, productive, unaware that they're contributing to the greatest behavioral research project in human history. And the ones who end up here? The ones who end up here are the most valuable subjects of all. By removing the external variables, jobs, family obligations, social pressures, we can observe human behavior in its purest form. She walked over to one of the workstations and pulled up what appeared to be a detailed psychological assessment. The name at the top read, David Martinez. We've been studying you for 18 months, David. We know that you have an obsessive personality, a deep need to understand how things work, and a tendency toward isolation when faced with stress. We know that you struggle with depression following your divorce, that you have difficulty maintaining close relationships, and that you derive most of your self-worth from your professional accomplishments. The accuracy of the assessment was terrifying. Every detail, every insight into my personality and behavior patterns was correct. We also know that you're intelligent enough to recognize when resistance is futile. You're a pragmatist, David. You understand that cooperation is your best chance for survival. I looked around the command center at the other technicians. They worked with quiet efficiency, showing no signs of distress or rebellion. Had they all started as unwilling subjects who eventually accepted their situation? Or had they been broken down and rebuilt, like the man I'd seen in the medical facility? What happens if I cooperate? You'll be given meaningful work, comfortable accommodations, and the opportunity to participate in research that will fundamentally change our understanding of human nature. You'll have access to technology and resources that don't exist in the outside world. And I'll never leave. David, look around you. Look at the scope of what we've built here. Do you really think the outside world has anything to offer that could compare to this? For a moment, standing in that high-tech command center surrounded by the most advanced surveillance system ever created, I almost understood what she meant. The work was fascinating. The technology was incredible, and the scale of the project was unlike anything that existed in legitimate research circles. But then I looked at those monitors again, at all those unsuspecting people living their lives under constant observation, and I remembered what I was really looking at. This wasn't research. It was predation on a massive scale. I need time to think, I said. Dr. Chen smiled. Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, David, time is something you now have in abundance. As she escorted me back to my room, I began planning. They had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of my personality. Yes, I was obsessive and pragmatic, but I was also stubborn, and I had built a career on finding weaknesses in systems that their creators thought were impregnable. The observatory might have captured my body, but they hadn't captured my mind. Not yet. And as long as I could still think, still plan, still resist, there was hope. The door of my room sealed shut behind me with a soft hydraulic hiss, and I found myself alone with the cameras and my thoughts. I looked up at those mechanical eyes and smiled. Let the games begin, I whispered. After all, they wanted to study human behavior under pressure. I was about to give them the most interesting case study of their careers. End of part 4. Author's note. This story explores themes of digital privacy, technological surveillance, and the gradual erosion of human autonomy in our interconnected world. While fictional, it reflects very real concerns about how our personal data is collected, analyzed, and potentially exploited by entities we may never even know exist. In an age where our every click, purchase, and movement can be tracked and cataloged, the line between voluntary data sharing and involuntary surveillance becomes increasingly blurred. The observatory may be fiction, but the technologies and methodologies it employs are not as far-fetched as we might hope.